Hello Perspectives class, welcome back. Today we're giving a quick overview of constructivism. This is a theory that lies on the interpretive side of the scale, but definitely from an interpersonal perspective is interested in what's going on inside people's heads. So it's a cognitive processing theory, trying to get inside the message construction process. So constructionists see that the world as a place where individual differences in cognitive complexity and cognitive processing affect our ability to create and adapt messages. In order for me to create and adapt a message to a specific situation or circumstance or even audience, I need to have a little bit of sophistication or cognitive complexity, as we'll come to find out. So the bottom line is that people who are more cognitively complex are more able to produce more sophisticated messages. So that's what this theory will be all about. We'll give a quick overview, but before we do, let's define what a construct is, and then I'm going to have you do a quick activity. So you should be watching this overview video before you read the chapter or the document that I've put there for you. So first let's think about what a construct is. If we look at this word as a verb, it means to put something together or to build something, to arrange something mentally, or to combine something meaningfully. If we think about it as a noun, we're thinking of a mental framework or something that is inferred or a non-observed entity. So it's a little bit more abstract. If you think about the real variables that we talked about versus the nominal variables, constructs would be those nominal concepts that we were talking about. They're a little more abstract. It's like love. What is love? How do you define love? Love is abstract. Or democracy. What is democracy? Democracy is abstract. You can't measure democracy outright. You have to operationalize it. Well, constructs are just that. They're something that is a little bit more abstract. So they're postulated or they're an explanatory entity or process. So that's what a construct is. I want you to do a quick activity for me. So I want you to think about a couple of people your same age that you know pretty well. Okay? And I want you to pick one person out who you really like and you enjoy being around them. They're somebody that just gives you energy and you just enjoy their company. So you're going to pick one person like that. And then I also want you to pick out somebody that you dislike. Okay? Take a moment, think through people that are about your same age in your peer group, and one person that you really like and enjoy spending time with, and then somebody, and that you know pretty well. So you need to know both of these people pretty well, and then somebody that you just don't like very well. Once you have two specific people in your mind, I want you to take a sheet of paper and I want you to write their names at the top of two columns. So split the sheet of paper and you're going to write their names as if there were two columns on that sheet of paper. Take a moment before you write anything down. You're not going to write anything yet. And I want you to take a moment and mentally compare and contrast those two people in terms of their personality, their habits, their beliefs, the way they treat others. Don't write anything down. Just take a few minutes and think about them. Don't limit yourself to just similarities and differences between the two, but let your mind play over the full range of characteristics that make them who they are. Take a few minutes to do that. Then, once you've done that, on your piece of paper, I want you to take about 3 to 5 minutes to describe. So you might want to set, hey Siri, set a timer for 5 minutes. And my Siri just turned on.
5 minutes, starting now.
Yes, thank you, Siri. I want you to set a timer and do that. In about 3 to 5 minutes, I want you to describe the person you enjoy using individual words and short phrases so that a stranger would understand what he or she is like. Skip physical characteristics, but list all of the attributes, mannerisms, and reactions to others that identify who that person is. Okay? So you're going to take 3 to 5 minutes to do that. Then you're going to do the same thing for the person that you don't like. Again, you're going to write down all of the personal characteristics or actions that you associate with that person, and you're going to take 3 to 5 minutes for each of them. After you've done that, then you can turn this video back on and we'll keep going. All right, I'm assuming that you've done that exercise and that activity before you've proceeded. If you haven't, stop the video, go back and do that exercise. It's really important that you do that so you get a valid measure of your own cognitive complexity. Now that you've done this little activity, you're probably wondering, what have we measured? What are we looking at? Well, this little test was developed by Walter Crockett and it was called the Open-Ended Role Category Questionnaire. And what it's trying to do is sample the number of interpersonal constructs that you come up with that you use to construct meaning about someone else. And so the constructivists, the folks that came up with this theory, Jesse Delia and his colleagues, use it to determine the degree of our cognitive complexity. Now, there are more concepts that the role category questionnaire is designed to tease out, but these theorists and this theory really uses this one concept of construct differentiation to tease out people's cognitive complexity. And that cognitive complexity is applied to the impressions that we form of other people, how we explain other people, and things that we identify about them. They would suggest that there are, in broad terms, 2 kinds of people. And this is done tongue-in-cheek, but there are 2 kinds of people. There's those people who think there are 2 kinds of people and those who don't, right? The first kind of person isn't very cognitively complex, right? They're cognitively immature. They're only able to see things in black and white. The second kind of person is actually more cognitively complex and has developed a sophisticated way of seeing the world and seeing people. So that's what the RCQ is trying to tease out. And so what I'm going to do now is we're going to quickly score your RCQ, and I'm going to tell you how to do that. You can pause the video again and score it if you want, or you can score it later. So one of the things that the RCQ is measuring is differentiation, and that's the number of separate personality constructs used to portray a person or a behavior or something that you're observing. Constructivists regard the combined number of constructs as your index of cognitive complexity. So let's work on adding up the number of constructs that you have in both of your lists. Okay, so let's assume that you chose a friend named Chris and a coworker named Pat. So you're going to add up the number of different descriptions you used to describe both people. As a rule of thumb, consider that each new term represents an additional mental construct. If going through your list you realize that you've written the same thing down twice or 2 things that really capture the same characteristic of that person, then only count 1 of those. For instance, if you wrote down that Chris was both sharp and competent, well, those are slightly different things because competence can be different than intelligence, so give yourself 2 points for that. There are exceptions, though, to the 1 term equals 1 construct rule. If you have adjectives or adverbs that simply modify a characteristic, if you say that Chris is sincere and then you also wrote that Chris was totally sincere, then obviously that's just 1 construct. So only give yourself 1 point for that. Certainly you can use idioms like he's a good old boy, but that's 1 construct, so you get a single point for that. And physical descriptions should be tossed out. So if you said Chris is tall or Pat is muscular, then just discard those. Those don't get points. Demographic labels also don't get anything. So if you said that Chris was Irish, then that doesn't tell us anything about Chris's characteristics or character, so skip over those. Apart from those, some slight rules, close calls should go ahead and get the benefit of a doubt and give yourself an extra point. All right, so tally up the number of descriptions in both columns, and then that combined score is an index, according to Delia and his colleagues, of your interpersonal construct differentiation. And then we'll talk in class more about those scores, but you could have a score. I mean, I've seen scores that are pretty low in the the 5 to 10 range. I've also seen scores that are really high in the 45 range, but a typical adult will average between 20 and 25. So go ahead, if you want, pause this video and add up your scores now. So research has established that RCQ scores are independent of IQ. We're not talking about intelligence, empathy, writing skills, or even extroversion. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is cognitive complexity. And so constructivists maintain that the high scores on this instrument, especially given that it's a free response instrument, that it takes more than just being loquacious or having the gift of gab, as my mom might say. And instead, it requires a wide range of interpersonal concepts or constructs in order to generate a long list. So that's why it's an indicator of your cognitive complexity. Okay, there are 4 assumptions that we're going to quickly review about this theory. The first assumption is that people make sense of the world through their systems of personal constructs. And again, constructs are those cognitive templates that we, according to the authors of this theory, that we fit over reality in order to bring order to our perceptions. So that's the first assumption, that we use these constructs to make sense of the world. And again, those constructs are evidence of the complexity with which we bring to how we understand the world. The second assumption is that that people who are more cognitively complex in their perceptions obviously have a communication advantage over those with less developed construct structures. So the second assumption is these cognitively complex people will have more sophisticated communication. I'm a huge fan of Calvin and Hobbes cartoons. It's a shame that Waterston doesn't publish those anymore, but they're wonderful. So I love this particular cartoon, and it's also in your reading that I do look at. Calvin wants a horseyback ride from his dad. His dad is busy, tries to put him off, but Calvin gives him this wonderfully complex scenario that guilts his dad into giving him a horseyback ride. So Calvin, a more complex, perhaps, view of the world and understanding than his dad. Calvin, I'm busy. His dad could have given Calvin a more complex reason for why he couldn't give him a horseyback ride right then, but Calvin, obviously very intelligent little person. The third assumption is that strategic adaptation, or our application of our cognitively complex understanding of the world and sophisticated communication, is a developmentally nurtured skill. That this is something that we grow in over time. And particularly, one of the things that this theory suggests is that we are trained or nurtured in this skill by our parents, our educational environment, the people around us, mentors, if you will. And so, therefore, parents from more advantaged socioeconomic backgrounds, etc., are more likely to use more sophisticated communication, and in turn their children will be socialized in more sophisticated environments. So once cognitive complexity is developed, and complex ways of thinking are built in, they tend to perpetuate themselves. So there might be a haves and have-nots in this ability, in this capability. So some have wondered if there's not an ethical obligation then to make cognitive complexity more available to more people in some way. But this is the third assumption, that the strategic adaptation of your messages is a developmentally acquired or nurtured skill. So the question that I just framed was, does this idea that you can develop a certain level of culture that leads to complexity, and that complexity is communicated or handed down through communication, does that path seem to suggest that the rich get richer, a have and have not scenario? The fourth assumption is that communication is goal-directed. So this assumption really puts everything together, that a person who is cognitively complex designs their messages, and we'll get more into the rhetorical design logics in class, designs their messages to produce sophisticated communication that then will produce beneficial outcomes. So the idea that communication is goal-directed, we communicate in order to achieve goals and obtain objectives that we want. So these are the four assumptions of the theory. I hope you did the RCQ activity, and we will really spend most of our time in class working with this theory and applying it to a scenario. We'll see you then.